Hello and welcome, I'm your CodeMonkey. In this lecture, we're going to learn about the Unity layout and set it up. So first things first, let's familiarize ourselves with the various Unity windows to create our own layout. It's very important that you feel comfortable with your layout, that you have easy access to all the things that you need and you know where everything is. You can see that there's lots of tabs everywhere over here on the Unity window. All of them can be dragged and dropped in any different position. So you can customize your layout to get it looking exactly as you want. You can set it up in any way, but it will be easier to follow this course if you're following the same layout as me. I'm assuming you've seen my quick basics video, so I'm assuming you know what is the inspector, what is a game object, what is a transform, what is the console, what is the hierarchy, and so on. If this is the very first time you're seeing the Unity interface, go watch that other quick video first just to learn the absolute basics. Now for me, I've been using Unity for over 10 years now, so let's see the layout that I've developed over the years. First, the inspector on the right side, just like default. That way we always have a nice view of the selected object and whatever scripts and components it has. Then for the hierarchy, I like to put it down here on the left side. We're going to make sure that our scene is always organized, so we don't need the hierarchy to take up tons of space. Then with the project files next to it, this corner is enough to really browse all of the files. We want the console to be on the tab right next to it. Usually I find that when making the game, I want to look at the project window, but when playing the game, I just want to look at the console. So keeping them in the same place but on different tabs works great. Then over here on the center, the scene view, and again with the game view right next to it. Okay, so this is the basic layout that I normally use. Now for a couple more options, let's go into the project window. And on the top right corner, you can see over here these little 3 dots. By default, it shows you a 2-column layout, so there's a column here and a column here. But personally, I prefer the 1-column layout. This showcases all of the project files in a nice compact list view. The one thing where I prefer the other one is if you're browsing for some visual assets over here, you can increase the thumbnail size. But for most times, I really like to use the 1-column layout, much more compact. Also, since we're talking about the project window, just in case you don't know, there's over here this little button with the eye. This one has to do with package visibility. If you toggle it, then some of the installed packages are hidden, whereas if you untoggle it, then you can see all of the various packages with all the source code and so on. You can expand over here the packages, and right now it is showing all of them with source code, the things, everything there. And if you click on this, then it hides and only shows a bunch of core ones. But for the most part, you really want to leave this ticked and leave this one collapsed, nice and clean. Okay, so then on the console, over here, once again, let's go into the 3 dots. And for the log entry, for this one, I like to select 1 line. This makes the console nice and compact, which I personally prefer. You can see more logs without taking up more space. And if you want to read the whole log, you can always just click on it to see the whole stack trace. Now, there are also some more options over here if you want. For example, show the timestamp. This will show the timestamp when each message was sent. You can use a monospace font, meaning a font where every character has the exact same width. So a bunch of options, but for me, leaving it just like this works perfectly fine. Then also importantly, over here, these 3 buttons. These toggle the visibility for the type of messages that appear in the console. The left one, this one is for regular messages. We're going to use this a lot. Then we've got warnings and finally errors. If you untoggle them, then the messages of that type will not show up on the console. So if you ever come across an issue where nothing is showing up on the console, make sure all 3 of these buttons are ticked. Then on the left side, on clear, you can click on the arrow to see more options. I like to set it to clear on play. Then collapse. This one basically collapses messages that are the same, all of them into one entry. Personally, I do not like this. I want to see every single message as it comes out, even if it's repeated. I've also seen this lead to a lot of confusion for some people. They think their code is firing just one message when it's actually firing hundreds. So to avoid any confusion, make sure you leave this untoggled. Then for error pause, this will automatically pause the game when an error occurs. You should definitely have this one toggled. If there's an error, you definitely want to know about it. You want to know when it happens so you can fix it. Whereas if you untoggle this, you might get some errors and the game might keep playing, which will then lead to lots of confusion when something starts behaving weirdly. So always leave this one toggled. And then the editor button, this one is for a more advanced use case, so don't worry about it. Okay, so that's the console. Then over here for the game view, we've got a button here to select the aspect ratio. Let's go ahead and select Full HD. This one is a 16:9 aspect ratio, so everything is pretty normal. This will really only matter when we start working on the UI, but still I like to keep it as 16:9 always. Then on this button that says Play Focus, we can modify some options. Basically, Focus will play exactly like this on this small window. If you choose Maximize, then it will maximize this window when playing the game, and Play in Focus will play the game even when the window is not in focus. Then another important one is actually on the same one as the aspect ratio. Here we've got a button to toggle VSync. Usually when developing the game, you really want to toggle this. That's because right in the beginning, when the game doesn't really have anything, if you leave it untoggled, then this might run at like 1000 frames per second, and that will pretty much drive your GPU crazy. Finally, if your game view is looking a bit too pixelated, make sure over here on the scale slider, make sure this one is not zoomed in. This one should always be pushed straight to the left as much as possible. Okay, so that's the game view. Then over here on the scene view, for this one, default should be good. These 2 buttons are extremely important. Pretty much all the time, you want to keep the tool handles on the pivot and not on the center. If you ever see your handles on weird places, always come back to this. You want this on pivot pretty much all the time. Then for rotation, sometimes local is useful, but for the most part, you should probably be keeping it in global. Then for the grid, showing the grid and Y, yep, that looks pretty good. A nice little visual grid. Then you've got a bunch more options if you want. Then next to it, we've got snapping. This one we also don't need this for now. And finally, same thing for increment, also don't need this. Okay, then on the right, for the draw mode, let's leave it unshaded. For 2D, let's leave this disabled, since we're working on a 3D game. For lights, let's make sure this one is enabled. For sound, we're only going to add this in the end, so it doesn't really matter for now. Then for special effects, usually you want this one to be enabled so it shows everything. You can click on the arrow and make sure all of them are toggled. The only exception is always refresh. You probably don't need this little scene window to be refreshing at 60 frames per second, so you can leave that one unticked and tick all the others. Then these are for the hidden objects, so let's leave them toggled. For the camera, here are the defaults. And finally, gizmos, leave them all enabled as the defaults. Alright, so with all that said, here is the layout that I'm going to be using throughout the course. It will be easier to follow the course if you're using the exact same layout as me, so ideally you should be using this. But again, like I mentioned, all the windows are customizable, so if there's something that you absolutely prefer differently, then go ahead. You can drag and drop and place any windows anywhere you want. So once you have a layout you're happy with, you can go up here to the top right corner where it says default, you can click on it, and here you've got a bunch of layouts, so you can save your new layout. So I'm going to save this one as Kitchen Chaos, and then over here you can select any one you want. For example, if you ever have some issues with any kind of weird editor windows, you can load back the default layout and then go back and load your own layout. Okay, so with that, our layout is set up. The next important thing is setting up Visual Studio, so let's do that in the next lecture.